Welcome back to This Old Haunt on HGTV, the only renovation show where the ghosts are restless and the equity is metaphysical.
Hey folks, I'm Gary, and I believe every building has a story.
And I'm Chad, and I believe every story has a ghost, or at the very least, wet footprints that end just outside the nursery door.
After renovating Moonset's own House 333, we've headed over to jolly old England, where we are renovating the Union Inn, now the Union Steakhouse, a modern restaurant with a sleek interior and a deeply haunted foundation.
It's got exposed beams, rustic brick, and one confirmed Victorian woman who won't move on until someone finds her baby's bones and gives her a proper apology. And here is Malcolm, owner of the Union Inn. We've tried holy water. We've tried Latin. Eventually, I just put out a high chair.
We've got a lot planned. Reclaimed wood tables, industrial fixtures, and we're finally replacing the glass panel that showcased the baby skeleton in the wall.
We're thinking tasteful sconce instead. Warm light, soft shadows, fewer historical tragedies staring directly at you in the dining room. The coroner asked me to remove the bones. I said sure, but they crumbled when he breathed on them. I still hear them cry when it rains.
Now, the pub was originally 3 cottages, home to fishermen, tailors, and at least one mournful specter who wanders the halls looking for her lost child.
We're preserving that charm by integrating nautical accents and warding sigils in the grout lines. The grout bled once. Only once. And then it stopped when I started sobbing.
In the toilet ghosts, we're not ignoring them.
Not this time, Gary. We're putting in motion-activated lights with a soft close ghost portal, keeping the vibes mellow and the spirits contained. They like the lights. It makes looking in the mirror less terrifying.
We're calling the color palette Coastal Elegy. Think a soft oyster white barely covering the unspeakable sins of the past.
It's all about balance, Gary. Sometimes I like to put a single bullet in a revolver and give it a spin. They love to play games. So much character in this place.
So stick around because we're transforming this 200-year-old ghost trap into a steak-forward fine dining experience without compromising mood or your appetite.
This Old Haunt is brought to you by Leyline Floor Wax, for when the portal on the floor really needs to shine.
Christ, Malcolm, no!
We'll be right back to This Old Haunt on HGTV. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived at check-in time. That's right, folks. You are checking into the dusty old halls of Creep Street Podcast, where the scares just keep coming. We got you soaking wet with our episode on Great Lakes sea monsters, so we thought we'd take another hop over to jolly old England for another tale of haunting and woe, this time concerning a particular establishment. A place that has existed for centuries and been used for many different things, from a sailor's home to a steakhouse. Folks, today's episode is The Haunting of the Union Inn. That's right, folks, that's right. Let me serve it up to you medium rare with my sources here. Main source really was one book, The Best of British Ghost Stories, Volume 2 by Sophie Jackson. Well, folks, for nearly 2 centuries, the Union Inn has stood proudly at 8 East Street, serving up food, drink, and good conversation for the folks of Rye in East Sussex, UK. The locals knew it well. It was the kind of place where the floors creaked to announce your arrival. The ale was always flowing, and you could count on overhearing at least one conversation you weren't supposed to hear. But alas, times change. Today, that same building is home to the Union Steakhouse, a sleek, modern restaurant dishing out 30-day aged Hereford steaks to a whole new kind of clientele. The dim, smoky interiors of the old pub are gone, and in their place are the clean linens, the polished tables, and a wine list that could even make Edgar Allan Poe's Fortunato cream his pants. Needless to say, it's a new chapter with a new look. But not everything in the Union was so easy to renovate. No. The building's oldest residents, the ones who don't need reservations, they have no interest in trendy lighting or dry-aged beef. They've been here far longer than the menu, and they're not going anywhere. Because beneath the fresh paint and updated finishes, the ghosts of the Union's past still linger. And no amount of modern charm or feng shui is going to chase them out. Long before it became a pub or even a steakhouse for that matter, the Union Inn was something else entirely. In fact, it wasn't even an inn. The building began its life as 2 small cottages and a shop, all constructed during the late medieval period, which means the walls, now hosting medium-rare Hereford steaks, have seen more than their fair share of history and probably a few plagues. It wasn't until 1830 that the transformation into what we know it as now began. A man named John Hunter took one of the cottages and turned it into a pub. He called it the Union Beer House, a name that even now raises a few questions, specifically the word union. Some say it might have been inspired by a political union or a high society marriage arrangement, though whose union exactly is still a mystery. There's even speculation that John named it after his own marriage, perhaps hinting at just how central his wife Sarah was to the operation. And that checks out. Because while John worked as a tailor by day, Sarah was actually the one who ran the bar. Between suits and pints, the couple made it work. But the business was far from booming. Then in 1839, John died, leaving Sarah to run the show. She held the license for a time before passing it on to their son, James Hunter. And here's the thing. Nothing about the Union's early years screamed success. At this point, the place wasn't much more than just the front room of a house with a partition thrown in to separate the bar from the bar parlor. Cozy and intimate it sure was. Customers back then got very well acquainted, mostly because they were practically sitting right on top of each other. And James, like his father before him, found that keeping the pub afloat would be no small task. He too worked as a tailor on the side, trying to stitch together a living while pouring pints in between. But by 1858, the numbers just didn't add up. James was petitioned as an insolvent debtor and hauled into court. It wasn't until the other 2 cottages finally folded into the main structure that the Union began to resemble the kind of pub that we recognize today. And more importantly, this is when it began to turn a profit. The expansion helped for sure, but the pub's location was also key, just a short stroll from the coast. The Union quickly became a favorite haunt of fishermen and boat owners, folks who knew their way around a pint, a storm, and the occasional sea shanty, and some of them would never leave. You see, the Union didn't just serve drinks. It also hosted inquests, legal proceedings held to determine how a person died. And when it came to coastal communities, death at sea was a more than common cause of demise. These inquests were a common practice at the time. In small fishing villages, taverns were often the largest public buildings available, big enough to handle a crowd and practical enough for whatever else needed doing. So when a fisherman or a sailor went missing and was later found dead, it wasn't unusual for their body, sometimes badly decomposed, to be laid out at one of the pub's old wooden tables for inquest. And yes, when I say table, I mean the same tables where folks might have eaten their supper the night before or made breakfast at in the morning. Rigor mortis and roast beef under the same roof. And it wasn't just a one-off. Multiple inquests were held at the Union over the years. Each one was accompanied by a hushed crowd, the salt of the sea clinging to the air, and the stark reminder that commercial fishing, then and even today, remains one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. The Union may have finally started making money, but the cost was steep. And some debts, as we've seen, aren't measured in pounds and pence, but in flesh and blood. One can only imagine what the local fishermen thought when their beloved watering hole, the place where they shared drinks, stories, and the occasional inquest, suddenly found itself under the banner of the People's Refreshment House Association. For the uninitiated, that's not a new name for a pub trivia league. It was a temperance organization, the kind that promoted the sale of non-alcoholic beverages, which for a coastal tavern full of sea-hardened drinkers must have landed like a fishing net full of trash. Imagine the same pub that once hosted soggy sailors and strong spirits and the occasional corpse now offering lemonade and a stern lecture on straight-edged living. It's fair to say the Union Inn has seen an evolution of sorts, from humble beginnings as a cottage, to a courtroom by the sea, to a temperance outpost, and now a modern steakhouse. This building has seen lifetimes stacked on lifetimes, moments of joy, grief, laughter, loss, and more than a few rough and tumble nights. So really, it's no surprise that a few spirits of the non-alcoholic variety have decided to linger. After all, when a place carries this much emotional weight in its walls, sometimes the dead just don't feel like leaving. For all its years of history, revelry, and sorrow, the Union has, unsurprisingly, adopted a full supporting cast of specters to fill its rooms and halls. The three most commonly reported are as follows: a woman, a sailor, and something that's a bit harder to pin down. A weeping voice with no visible source. Let's start with the woman. According to local legend, she was an unmarried mother, a fact that in less forgiving times was scandalous enough to ruin a life and keep it ruined. It's said that she died after falling down the stairs to the cellar, though some say that she didn't fall at all. Rather, the poor lady was pushed. Either way, her neck was broken in the fall, and her spirit has never left the Union Inn. To this day, her specter is said to linger near the stairs, forever tethered to the site of her final, brutal descent. And then there's the sailor, or perhaps a fisherman of some kind, often seen upstairs. Nobody is certain who he is. Some say he's just a regular of the pub who loved the place so much and just didn't want to leave it behind. Others suspect he might be one of the poor souls pulled from the sea. His final chapter played out on one of those old tavern tables during an inquest. His spirit now wandering the rooms where his story was last told. And then there's the weeper, a specter not seen but heard. Sometimes the voice is soft, sometimes sharp, but always mournful. The sound of someone crying in the empty corners of the Union. Some believe it's the woman who fell down the stairs, still mourning her fate, while others think it's a child. A child whose cries are not for themselves, but for someone else. Perhaps the child of the single mother whose life ended on the stairs. And here's where things take a darker turn. Because for several years, the Union was in possession of something deeply unsettling. The bones of a child that were kept at the pub. But why? And how? Well, we'll get to that in due time, but for now, just know this. The Union Inn isn't just haunted by stories, but by people with names lost to time, but whose grief, joy, and tragedy can never be given an identity. There's also talk of a fourth figure haunting the Union. This one, dressed in a Victorian soldier's uniform. He's occasionally spotted, loitering on the property, always quiet, always alone. But here's the thing about this lurking spirit. Some believe this might not be a soldier at all. It could simply be the sailor. Uniforms from this period can be tricky, especially in the flickering light of a haunted pub. One man's naval coat is another man's military tunic. So, is the Union home to another distinct ghost, or is our seafaring friend just moonlighting as infantry? The lines blur, as they often do in haunted places. In the 1990s, the Union was run by a landlord named Steve Dartnell. At the time, he was raising a young son in the building, but not long after settling in, strange things began to happen. It started with the sounds. Thumps and bangs from the upstairs room, heavy and deliberate noises, and whenever Steve or a staff member went up to investigate, of course, they'd find nothing. No one there, and no reason for the ruckus. Then came that feeling. Steve and the others began to describe a heavy, unsettling atmosphere on the upper floors. Not constant, but certainly present, and fluctuating in intensity. Sometimes it was like walking into a room that didn't want you there. Cold air, tense silence, and that tickle in your spine when you know you're not alone, even if you can't see what's watching. And the cause is still a mystery. There's no official record to show a history of violence at the inn, just a creeping sense that something upstairs isn't thrilled about the new management. It was around this same time that Steve Dartnell's young son began to talk about someone visiting his bedroom at night. The visitor, according to the child, was Postman Pat. Now, for those unfamiliar, Postman Pat is a beloved children's television character who first appeared on TV in the early 80s. He's a kindly postman with a bright red van and a black and white cat named Jess, delivering letters and gentle life lessons around the fictional village of Greendale. He's not exactly terrifying. In fact, he's made of clay. It's a claymation sort of plasticine, sort of Wallace and Gromit style animation. So when Steve Dartnell's young son began saying that Postman Pat was visiting his bedroom at night, it seemed innocent enough. Cute even. Until a full-grown shadowed figure started walking through locked doors. And then it became significantly less charming. Now, under normal circumstances, that might sound cute and harmless even, the whole idea of the child saying Postman Pat is visiting me at night.
It'd be like Steve from Blue's Clues paying a visit.
Exactly. A child's imagination blends bedtime cartoons with their sleepy dreams, and at first that's exactly what Steve assumed, that it was just a little game, maybe something the boy had invented to make the dark less scary. But there's a post, actually, that I shared in a Patreon episode, and I went to find the actual story at Lon Strickland's website, Phantoms and Monsters, but the whole website's down. I couldn't find it, but it's essentially someone's personal story about seeing an entity that literally looked like Charlie Brown, but they just had the feeling that it was not there with good intentions. And as we know, we've talked about many times, it would make sense that an evil presence appearing to a child in order to make it less afraid at first so it could kind of worm its way into the lives of the family might present itself as a fictional character that the child loved, like Charlie Brown or like Postman Pat. Obviously not as well known here, but when I did the research, I went and looked who Postman Pat was, yeah, no, it would make sense. This sort of sweet, sort of like Wallace and Gromit-like mailman. But there's also, as we'll get into, reasons why he might be seeing that and calling it Postman Pat when it's not that at all. But then something happened that made Steve think twice about that old claymation creep, Postman Pat. One night, Steve was in his own bedroom when he saw a figure, a shadowy form, walk directly into his room through the closed door. It was hard to make out at first, the details, of course, but Steve was certain that the figure was male, and it crossed the room in silence and moved to the window. But this figure wasn't just passing through, it seemed as though it was there to watch him. Steve had the distinct, unnerving impression that this shadow man was not just wandering aimlessly, not playing out some long-forgotten routine as might happen in a residual haunting, but rather this was something else. This ghost seemed to notice him. And when it comes to hauntings, that changes everything. Because it's one thing to see a ghost, it's another thing entirely for a ghost to see you. After a long moment, the shadowy man turned and left the room, exiting through the same closed door through which he entered, and without a sound. Suddenly, the idea of old Postman Pat visiting his son's room at night didn't seem so whimsical or far-fetched. Well, curious and more than a little unsettled, Steve began to make a few quiet inquiries about what he'd seen, and what he found out was rather chilling. Turns out he wasn't the only one. The figure was known amongst the locals who had seen him before, and sometimes often. And while Steve had only glimpsed a shadow, others described this figure in far more detail. That he wore a dark blue jacket adorned with gold buttons, a uniform crisp and formal. Some even noted the resemblance to Postman Pat, which gave Steve's son's bedtime visitor a whole new layer of meaning. But make no mistake, this was not your average ghost in sailor's garb. The cut and quality of the coat suggested that this specter was once a man of rank. It wasn't just any old seaman. He looked like a skipper, possibly a first mate, someone who gave orders to those around him. Which raises a question: did this man die at sea? And if so, was his body ever recovered and possibly laid out in the Union for an inquest like so many others before him? And the mystery only deepens, because the shadowy specter of a sailor didn't confine himself to the Union alone. He was frequently seen wandering into and throughout the house next door. The elderly woman who lived there had her own encounters. They were impactful enough that she refused to go upstairs alone. There's speculation that the two buildings were once connected, possibly by a door now long sealed up or hidden beneath modern renovations. And if true, the spirit may be following a blueprint that he walked in life. But as we know, this isn't just a residual haunting. This ghostly seaman isn't simply pacing old paths. People describe him as a dark presence, very aware and very observant of the living, able to react to them and not always with kindness. Some feel passively watched, and others feel wholly unwelcome. And if you'll remember, House 333, remember, it was a duplex, and the people that owned it, the in-laws, lived next door, and there was like a passageway in their closet, remember, where it would go from one house to the other. Maybe something is similar. Maybe there used to be a door there of some kind, or it's simply just passing through the wall of the structure into the old lady's house.
Right. He could be basically retracing the layout of whatever it was when he was there, when he was alive.
Absolutely, you got it. Well, Steve eventually reached a point where he could no longer bring himself to enter the bedroom where he'd seen the figure. The seaman, it turns out, wasn't shy. He'd been known to strut freely throughout the pub, completely unconcerned with things like walls, personal space, or even the delicate social etiquette of not popping in to scare someone in the men's toilet. That's exactly what happened to one unfortunate customer who went from midstream to mid-scream when the bearded figure calmly walked straight through the wall and into the room. A full-bodied apparition, quiet and intimidating. And just to really drive it home, seemingly disinterested in the living man's very mortal, very vulnerable moment. To no one's surprise, the man didn't stick around to see where the ghost went next. He gave it a shake, zipped up, and dipped out, hopefully washing his hands first. And then, just when Steve thought he'd gotten a handle on the place's hauntings, his regulars let him in on another local legend, one he had yet to encounter himself. Her name was Emily. According to those who remembered the story, Emily lived in the middle cottage, long before the three homes were merged into the Union. Her life spanned the 1850s, during the same era that James Hunter was struggling to keep the pub afloat. Emily's father was the town mortician, a man whose line of work required being surrounded by death every day. And it was he who reported her tragic end. She had slipped on the steps going down into the cellar and broke her neck in the fall. But accidents happen, right? Especially on narrow stairs in old buildings. Well, that was the story at least. But small towns have long memories, and they know how to keep their oral histories alive. The local rumor concerning Emily's demise was much darker. They said Emily had been pregnant and unmarried, a disgrace in the eyes of her father. And when he found out, he didn't comfort her or help her. Oh no, as the story goes, the bastard pushed her down the stairs, causing her death. His own daughter and unborn grandchild. Of course, there's another version, one no less tragic. Some say that Emily herself was so ashamed, so overwhelmed by her circumstances that she took her own life, throwing herself down those cellar steps in a moment of desperation.
Yeah, and so if the father did it, how does that make sense? He's like, you're a disgrace, so he kills his daughter and unborn child, and that's somehow less disgraceful?
Right, exactly, right, absolutely. Well, which version is true? No one can really say, but what is known is this. Emily has never left the Union. Her presence lingers, delicate, mournful, and seemingly tethered to the place where her story ended in tragedy. Whether she was pushed, fell, or even jumped, her memory remains. Witnesses still report seeing her around the property, usually in a red dress. Not a specter in white, nor even is she pale or translucent like so many textbook apparitions. Instead, the ghostly woman wears a bold red dress. Red, a color of passion and danger, depending on what you think she's trying to say. And if the story ended there, well, it would be tragic enough. But there's more, and it's rather macabre. Ooh, just had to take a quick pause there, Creep Street, just to give your poor palpitating heart a rest. If you're enjoying this episode, go ahead and follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. That's right. And if once a week is not enough for you, just head on over to patreon.com for all sorts of goodies. We got 3 different tiers there, something for every tier. So get your fixins. We even got a free tier where you can listen to the weekly sketches before they go live on the episode. Now, without further ado, back to today's story. Years ago, during a round of renovations by the pub's previous owners, the workers made a discovery that shifted Emily's story from ghost tale to cold reality. Hidden inside a wall, they found the remains of a baby. The small bones were fragile, old, and clearly had been there for a very long time. Instead of calling for immediate removal or proper burial, the owners made a choice, and a very odd one. They left the remains where they were, placing a glass brick in the wall so that customers could see them, on full display like some sort of grim curiosity from a traveling show. Some found it fascinating, and others, of course, found it disrespectful. And no shit. An adult's bones, I think, is, depending on the circumstances, is one thing, but a child's bones, especially a baby's bones, well, there's not too many avenues where you can make that seem okay, and at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that would be the opinion of most.
Yeah, absolutely. And being the man was a mortician, he would probably know how to remove an unborn child from the body of its mother. And he may have done so once again to hide something that he found shameful. When the choice was made to display the child's bones like some attraction at a freak show, the local coroner certainly was none too pleased. He formally requested that the bones be removed and given a proper Christian burial. But the request was denied, if not outright ignored. So the remains stayed and in plain sight, and with them, perhaps, the source of the ghostly weeping that is so often heard around the Union. Is it Emily, or is it perhaps her child? Or is it something more primal? The grief of a tragedy manifested into an entity all its own. Because if a soul can't move on, maybe it's because something was left behind that it doesn't want to leave. Whether the modern steakhouse has kept this grim architectural feature is anyone's guess. No one seems to know if the baby's remains, once displayed behind glass like a morbid exhibit, are even still there today. Given the restaurant's hip, cosmopolitan style, it seems unlikely. I know I personally would probably have trouble enjoying a T-bone with a child's bones stored right next to me. By the turn of the millennium, it may not have mattered. Exposed to years of light and air and the constant hum of human curiosity, the remains would have begun to deteriorate, slowly fading, until all that was left was the story. Well, Steve Dartnell always believed the child had been Emily. He thought she may have died maybe even during childbirth or shortly after. Maybe the baby was stillborn. And if the baby was not stillborn, well, maybe we're looking at an even darker possibility. One that adds infanticide to the list of unspoken crimes committed beneath the Union's old roof. Steve suspected that Emily's father, the town mortician, had hid the baby's corpse himself. That he'd fabricated the story about her fall to cover his crimes. That the shame of an unmarried daughter bearing a child was just too much for him to face. And so, he covered it up with murder and stone. Well, whatever the truth, the echoes remain, be it the footsteps upstairs, the weeping in the dark, or the lingering presence of a woman in red. One who walks the boards of a place she never really got to leave. And I like the idea I wanted to discuss real quick. The idea of women in red. Now, woman in white is a very common paranormal phenomenon. I like the idea of the red not being so much what the person might have worn in life, but what they might be trying to say. Being a color of passion or danger or what have you. The color red is interpreted so many ways throughout cultures around the world. When you look at history, some saw red as a color of evil. Some saw it as a color of love or royalty, Marshall, Michigan, our hometown, has a woman in red story that also kind of similar, obviously not nearly as grim, obviously, but that the woman was stood up by a lover or a fiance or a husband and either died or took her own life, and is often seen wearing red. It's sort of like a lingering symbol of passion or a love.
Maybe even fury.
Maybe even fury, you're right. Maybe rage. Absolutely. So the red, I think, is an interesting thing to kind of factor in here.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't heard very many stories of women in red as far as supernatural entities go.
Right. There's obviously entities in black, entities in white, but red is such a unique statement, and it can mean a lot of things.
It could mean that ghost fashion is changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She was a hip gal. She was with the times. Well, eventually the weights of the haunting became too much for Steve Dartnell and his family. By 1993, something had to give. So an exorcism was arranged. And with it came an attempt to sort of rebalance the ley lines that are even said to run through the property. Ley lines, of course, will be an episode all their own. They've come up in the periphery of many episodes throughout Creep Street. Crystals were placed in specific areas of the inn. Rituals were performed attempting to redirect the paranormal energy. But if the spirits were affected by all of this, they sure didn't show it. The ghosts remained seemingly unbothered, uninterested, and certainly showed no signs of leaving. One of their favorite little games was messing with the lights. Every night, Steve would make his rounds before bed, locking the doors, shutting off every switch, confirming the place was cleared out. And every morning, the lights in the toilets were back on. Always just the toilets. A daily memento to remind the owner, we're still here, and how about a courtesy flush?
Yeah.
The exorcisms may not have worked. The ley lines may not have shifted, and the ghosts, they just flipped switches like a gang of rapscallions. Sometimes a haunting doesn't need to be violent, it just needs to be consistent. Nearly a decade after Steve's attempts to exorcise the place, the Union Inn still had its ghosts. And in 2002, a team of paranormal investigators decided to pay them a visit. And they were not disappointed. During their investigation, they claimed to make contact with none other than Emily herself, a woman in red whose death had long haunted the old cellar stairs of the Union. But the most striking detail wasn't her appearance or her voice, it was her confusion. According to the team, Emily didn't know she was dead. When asked, she said she was 19. She lived with her family, and she claimed she was very happy. She said she remembered falling down some stairs, but didn't seem to realize that the fall had killed her. To her, it was just something that happened. A moment, not an ending. Even her answers about the red dress were strangely detached. She said she wasn't wearing it when she fell. It wasn't even her favorite. Just something she likes to wear from time to time. And when the team tried to gently press the question of whether she had been pregnant, well, Emily gave no answer at all.
It's interesting. I wonder if it's under circumstances where you die so quickly you don't know. You don't even have time necessarily to process that your death is imminent.
Right.
If that is why a lot of spirits think they're still alive.
Right. Just given modern pop culture, most famously probably The Sixth Sense. The whole idea of the specter not knowing, spoiler alert,
Yeah.
25 years later, the idea of the specter not knowing they're dead, or spoiler, another movie, The Others with Nicole Kidman, this idea of them not knowing that they had died. Where does that come from? Now, we do know in many cases, like psychics and stuff have said that spirits don't know they're dead because maybe, especially in the residual sense, because like we said, in the residual sense, those people might not even actually be there. It's just their energy replaying. So that could be the case if you're able to interrupt that cycle and maybe somehow coax an intelligent reaction. It's hard to say why a ghost would not know they're dead, but it also, I don't see why not. I could see it being both cases. A ghost knowing, especially if it was through malice, not just say like a someone's no-fault car accident, but especially something like murder, I could see why a specter then might know they were dead because of the circumstances surrounding that death. Whereas, like you said, compared to maybe it was something quick, maybe it was like a car accident.
Yeah. I mean, even on the subject of murder, you could be murdered and know that, oh, no, this is the end. I've been shot in the heart. I'm bleeding out.
Right.
This is it for me. Or you could be shot in the back of the head, execution style. And if you're just dead instantly and you never even knew it, that probably would explain that.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. That's a great point. It may be literally
your last memory.
Right. The vantage point of where you were at the time of the death, if you didn't know you were murdered, or like we said, or if it was just something you didn't see coming, how you might not even know. If it was so quick and so, that totally makes sense. Later, a second contact was made, this time with a seaman, the shadowy, uniformed figure who wandered the Union freely. His responses were minimal and blunt. Yes, he was male. Yes, he had made his living at sea. No, he didn't mind the team being there. But then he added something else. He admitted to being responsible for a few unexplained touches, specifically pinches and slaps experienced by female members of the team during the investigation. No apology from the salty old sailor, just quiet acknowledgement. Which leaves us with two ghosts that we know of definitively. One, confused and caught in a moment of heartbreak, and the other, far more aware. Maybe a little too aware. A girl in red who doesn't know she died, and a man in blue who knows he's dead and exactly where he is. Well, a year later in 2003, a second investigation was carried out at the Union Inn, and this time the old seaman had a lot to say. Gone was the tight-lipped, stoic presence of the previous session. Instead, something had shifted in the grizzled old sailor. Something made him willing to speak on this occasion. According to the team, he identified himself as a former member of the Royal Navy. He said he had lived at the cottage in that very building with his wife and children, that it was their home. Remember that before it became one place, it was like 3 different separate buildings, so very possible that he could have. But then came the turn. While he was away at sea, he said his wife had been murdered in the bedroom, the same bedroom that he's so often seen pacing. The same room where Steve Dartnell had once seen the shadowed figure enter his room and watch him in the dark. According to the ghost, he knew who had committed this crime. It was the first time the seaman had ever offered any reason for his presence. Before this, there had been only impressions, his awareness, his coldness, and the occasional pinching of an investigator. But this was a ghost that felt less like a memory and more like someone still processing something. But this new revelation changed things. Was his looming presence, that uneasy feeling in the bedroom, not necessarily malice, but grief? Was the tension that soaked the upstairs hallway really just unresolved anger, rage that the killer who took his wife had walked free? And in a darker moment, Steve even wondered, when the ghost had walked into the room that night and fixed his gaze upon him, was he really sizing him up, asking silently, "Are you the one who took her?" Like so many things pulled from seances and spirit boards, the story is hard to verify. No official records of a Navy man's wife murdered at the Union, no headlines, no dates, no names, but what do you do when the ghost gives you a motive and no way to prove it? Maybe he's telling the truth, maybe not, but if he is, then there's more than just memory haunting the Union. Further probing during the 2003 investigation peeled back even more layers of the Union's already tangled past. Oh, and things got much stranger. This time, the seaman had even more information to share. he claimed that the woman in red, the one everyone believed to be Emily, was actually named Sarah. And more than that, he said that he had been her father, and that it was her baby in the wall, which, if true, would flip this entire legend on its head. Remember, Sarah, very briefly, there's a Sarah mentioned at the top of the story. Back when the pub was first becoming a bar, she was the wife of Hunter, of Mr. Hunter, the tailor. During the day, he would work as a tailor, and she was actually the one who poured the drinks. But we only briefly mention her. So now we go back and we wonder, well, what if this isn't the woman who supposedly died on the stairs at all, but the wife of the tailor, of Mr. Hunter? Kind of adds a fun little layer in there, because then it's like, well, what's all her motive? Then why is she in red? But things didn't stop there. One of the sensitives present on the scene began to suspect something deeper, that there might be more than one seaman haunting the Union. Perhaps the Union was covered in seamen. Maybe these sightings and encounters weren't all coming from the same restless soul, but multiple ones that were layered and overlapping, as if the house were acting as a kind of trapdoor in time. A seaman sample, if you will, a sample of many seamen. The investigators made contact then with the girl herself, or someone claiming to be her, but her answers this time were a little inconsistent. She now agreed that she was under 20, matching the earlier claim that she had only been 19. But the rest had changed. Gone was the cheerful account of a happy home with her family, and this time she said that she had been pushed down the stairs by her father. She now admitted that she had been wearing a red dress, which she had previously denied. But again, she claimed not to know that she had died. She also denied that the baby's remains in the wall were her child's. So, interesting that she can change her story but still not remember she's dead. We'll get into it a little bit later because we're getting near the end here, but you got to wonder how much of the subconscious of the psychic or the sensitives or whomever's on site might be playing into this. Because here, things get even murkier. She stated that she had died during the reign of King George II, which would place her death sometime before 1727. But during a second seance held that same evening, she changed her answer again, this time saying she died in 1856. Now there's a problem, of course. In 1856, King George II had been dead for over a century. Queen Victoria had been on her throne for 19 years. If Sarah or Emily, or whoever it truly was, had died in 1856 at the age of 19, she would have certainly known whom her monarch was. It would have been printed on every coin, every letterhead, and every prayer, and every chapel. Which made me, just now as I'm telling the story, made me think, well, maybe the previous person, maybe they were saying something akin to the 19th year of the reign of Queen Victoria rather than I'm 19 or something. I don't know. I'm kind of grasping at straws there, but 19 pops up again there, and I don't know if maybe that was something that the Spectre might be trying as a way of giving time if it can't remember a year, but for some reason it remembers that.
And maybe things were lost in translation a little bit too, where they were able to pick up certain things she was saying, but they misconstrued it somehow.
Absolutely. Right. Maybe it's almost like you could write a letter, but then if you cut it up into little bitty bits and then threw it in the air and let the pieces fall, it would look like random words, letters, things that wouldn't. You might even piece together a sentence, and then later you realize the sentence was wrong, and you might say, well, the ghost was lying, or well, it doesn't mean the letter was lying. It just means the information came through all chopped up. So maybe you're right. Maybe it's something like that. So what are we left with here, folks? A girl in red with shifting stories, a sailor or sailors with motives that change with each passing year, contradictions layered over tragedy, truth tangled in folklore, Maybe it's memory decay, or it's the fragmenting of the spirit itself over time. Maybe it's things added up to by the psychics, who may very well be in contact with these spirits but are still adding their own concepts subliminally without even realizing it. Or maybe it's something even deeper, something elemental to the union's bones. A sort of psychic interference where stories bleed into one another until even the dead can't really tell what's real anymore. And so the union sits, now polished and modern and welcoming, but within it, time itself almost seems to collect and mix. And in those conditions, ghosts forget who they were, and sometimes who they've become or what they did. Of course, seances are notoriously prone to producing muddled results. It's part of their charm and their curse. They offer just enough clarity to pull you in and just enough confusion to keep you doubting what you've heard. Skeptics will tell you that this is clear evidence that the method itself is flawed. That when you're asking questions through a person via a Ouija board, glass divination, or automatic writing, what have you, what you're really tapping into is them, the psychic. That the answers don't come from a spirit realm, but from the unconscious thoughts of the questioner. In other words, you're not talking to a ghost, you're talking to your own expectations. That's harder to argue, of course, when the responses come from knocks on walls or from unexplained electrical anomalies. And obviously, I will once again repeat, this does not mean that they aren't actually in communication with spirits. But when you're using tools that require physical contact, where humans' influence is unavoidable, the waters get murky. Then again, what if the answers are real? What if the inconsistency isn't proof of deception, but a symptom of something deeper that we don't yet understand about space and time? Maybe the entity doesn't understand the question. Maybe it's confused or disoriented. Or maybe its memory, that its very identity, is fractured across time and dimensional static. And here's something that always gives one pause. With Ouija boards, spirits from centuries past, people who in life may have been completely illiterate, can suddenly spell with impeccable accuracy. They couldn't do it when they were alive, but in death, suddenly they have full command of the written and spoken word. So it raises questions about authenticity and interpretation, about what exactly we're reaching into when we slide that planchette across the board. Because whether you believe you're speaking with a spirit or just listening to the echo of your own subconscious, one thing remains the same: the answers never come easy. And then, of course, there's one last theory, that none of these contradictions are accidents. That what's been speaking through the boards and rapping on the walls and pacing through the bedroom isn't Emily or Sarah or even a sailor, but something else entirely. A malicious, perhaps trickster-like spirit, one that's been playing pretend, slipping into borrowed names, feeding misinformation, toying with expectations, as if the thing is improvising, just winging it. Because whatever's haunting the Union Inn, now the Union Steakhouse, it isn't shy. It's active, it's aware, and it's clearly been watching the years go by. And for the true stories behind the girl in red, whether she's Emily or Sarah, and the seaman who watches through the windows and walks through locked doors, those details may be lost to time, or buried in shame, or deliberately obscured by the spirits themselves for their own unknown purposes. But what's not in question is that something remains at the Union Inn. Something lives in those walls. And perhaps the strangest thing of all, for a building with centuries of history, ghostly inquests, sailor hauntings, and Victorian tragedy, the Union has only ever really presented two distinct spirits that we can firmly define, just two. Not a chorus of the damned, not a ghost in every corner, just a sailor and a girl in red, which begs the question, are they the only two spirits? Or are they just the only two willing to be seen? Oh, man, folks. Gage, now what are you thinking here? I mean, it's hard to say with these buildings that go back literally centuries, in this case, the late medieval period, that had so many purposes and probably saw so many people live in them, move out of them, come and go. Who's to say an entity can't be an amalgamation of many souls in a way?
Right, which would also explain the inconsistencies too. The psychics, for all we know, as a psychic, communicating with that supernatural realm, you probably hear a lot of things from a lot of different sources. And it's probably almost like trying to pick out a flute in a sea of white noise, almost. And like you said, this place is so old and has gone through so many changes. Who knows who's lived in it, died in it, how many spirits are there. And the spirits themselves, too, like we talked about, may also be kind of broken. That their identity and that their memories are inconsistent as well.
Exactly. Like certain ghosts are said to appear in multiple places that were maybe significant to a person's life. Well, like, does that mean that the consciousness itself is divided? And I like the idea of what you said about radio signals almost. It's like white noise. It's like millions, countless, indiscernible spirit signals that only a few strong ones kind of bleep through, or some kind of get tangled up together and form a larger one. And you're absolutely right. There's so many things to consider, especially when you're dealing with, history that just goes back so far. But I'll tell you what, Gage, I got a list of names that I bet would fit right in on the specials list at the Union Steakhouse.
Oh yeah? Who's that?
Folks, give it on up for our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, yes, folks. If you want to be just like that, if you want to get a nice slice of prime rib content, head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast for all sorts of goodies. Gage, you got anything in the oven? Anything you're working on?
Yeah, I've got a lot of tracks in the oven right now. Probably gonna start dropping some singles. So if you want to check that out, check out Vaporverse on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and Bandcamp.
Yes, folks. As always, thank you. We love you. We cannot thank you enough for your support, the years of listenership, and whether you're a Patreon subscriber or not, we thank you, and we welcome all the new. I know we're getting a lot of new listeners recently within the last few weeks, so welcome to all of you as well. Hope you feel right at home. We've got lots and lots. We are 5 years into this, and we are only scratching the surface. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night, and goodbye.